All right, good morning. Welcome, everybody. This is Casey O'Brien, the Executive Director of National CyberWatch and the National Cyber League Commissioner, and I want to welcome everybody to today's webinar, National Cyber League for the Classroom. I have with me James Jones, the Executive Director of the Mid-Pacific Information and Communication Technology Center, MPIC, at the City College of San Francisco, and David Durkee he's the Regional Director of the Midwest Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. And let me do a couple things here before we get started, and that is we're going to be recording this, so I want to make sure that I've got the recording going. And we'll make this available via the National CyberWatch Center YouTube channel. There'll be an email following this webinar with a link to that. So let's get into it. I'm assuming everybody can see my desktop. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. So just a few rules before we get into this. One is just to make sure you mute your phone or microphone when not talking. I've gone and done that with all the folks I can do. We'll allow plenty of time for Q&A. In fact, we really kind of want to breeze through the presentation portion of this webinar and allow plenty of time for discussion. I see a number of folks in the webinar that have participated in past NCLs, and we'd love to hear from those folks, especially how they've integrated the National Cyber League into the classroom, which is really the focus of today's webinar. And certainly we'll go over some ways in which faculty can do that and look at some resources available, but love to hear from those folks. I know there are some faculty on the webinar that have rearranged classroom schedules to specifically allow for the inclusion of NCL activities in the classroom, and I know some of those faculty are eager to hear from some of the more experienced coaches on the call on how specifically you've done that. If you have questions during the webinar, there's a couple ways we'll handle this. One is we'll allow about 25 minutes for Q&A. So if you want to hold your questions till about 11:30 Eastern time, where we'll get into the official Q&A portion, that'd be great. There's a couple ways we can handle that. One is you can, for those that have logged into WebEx, there's a chat feature, and I'll be monitoring that as the webinar progresses, and you can type your questions directly into the chat feature, or you can simply wait to ask your question at the Q&A portion. If you have any technical problems, you can contact me, Casey O'Brien, so it'll be C-O-B as in boy, R-I-E-N as in Nancy, at nationalcyberwatch.org, and I'll go ahead and put my email address into the chat right now. And again, that's C-O'Brien, C-O-B-R-I-E-N, at nationalcyberwatch.org if you're having some technical difficulties. So that's just a few of the rules of the webinar itself. So about the National CyberWatch 2015 webinar series, this is our second year doing this. It's the last Friday of each month. It's an hour long. We have a lot of great topics. We're going to talk about next month's topic at the end. We record these. We archive them on the National CyberWatch Center website, which is being revamped. I believe it's going to go live in the next 2 days. And so you'll be able to get access to the archives of recordings. We've got some great topics. So there'll be an email again following this webinar with a link to today's recording. So look for that. And without further ado, let's get it. I introduced myself. I introduced James Jones, David Durkee. So a little bit about what we're going to cover today. Now, we're going to start by looking at the current cybersecurity exercise landscape and use that as a point of departure, really to describe why the NCL was founded and what were the considerations that a group of educators decided would differentiate the National Cyber League from the myriad other competitions that exist, especially in the academic space. And then, of course, just a high-level discussion around what is the NCL. Look at some of the 2014 fall season highlights. Talk a little bit about enrichment and assessment and preparation for certifications, support for players and coaches, and then a little bit about the upcoming fall season, and then we'll get into our Q&A portion. So we'll start here with the current cyber security exercise landscape. And primarily, we're talking about the academic cybersecurity exercise landscape. So just a quick shout out to our friends at the National Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. This weekend is in fact the national championship of the Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition, and there are a couple of folks on the call that have been involved with that for a number of years. David Durkee, who manages the National Cyber League gyms, is the regional director of the Midwest Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. I know George Markowski's on the call, and he's been involved in the Northeast region. I've run the Mid-Atlantic for a number of years, and they've got their national competition going on. Many of the players from the National Cyber League the past 4 years are competing, in fact, in this weekend. So just a shout out to them, and we hope that goes great. And so when we talk about the current cybersecurity exercise landscape, primarily we're talking about playoff systems, one-off playoff systems. So perhaps there's a virtual qualifying round that takes some number of teams that compete virtually and reduces them down to a smaller number than that perhaps go on to some kind of a face-to-face or even virtual regional event. And depending on how the team or individuals do, that may be, in fact, their last chance to compete. These exercises tend to be gaming exercises first and educational experiences second, and that's not really a judgment. It's really more of just a fact. We're not saying that one's better than the other. Typically, it's difficult to measure participants' performance and or skills, especially in the team-based competitions, unless you define, if you will, player roles where there's one firewall person and one Unix, Linux sysadmin person, and there's one captain, and people stay in those roles for the duration of the competition. It's very difficult to look at individuals' performance. So they also can be expensive, especially the face-to-face competitions, and generally they don't scale well. So an example is for example, the Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. So I personally have been involved with that since its inception in 2005, and scale here defined by only 8 students can participate in a collegiate cyber defense competition at a time, and there are practical limitations for that, especially if you're running a face-to-face event. Space can be constrained. It's difficult to get 100 laptops, for example, or 100 systems, 100 identical systems to use. But the challenges with that are that many players don't get to participate. And the story I like to tell is about 6 years ago, I was invited to come down and talk to the University of Maryland at College Park club, a security club they had started. And that first year I went and talked with those students. They had about 20 in the room. And we're talking about the collegiate cyber defense competition and, how to prepare and how to get involved. Well, fast forward now, 5-6 years, and they have upwards of about 600 plus students in their club, and only 8 can participate. And so the founders of the National Cyber League felt like we had to address some of these what we saw as deficits, right? And so it was really a look at those the current competitions that drove the NCL to to be created and to specifically work on differentiating itself from other competitions. So, for example, how do you handle this doesn't scale well problem, or only 8 students can compete at a time? And there's a couple ways in which we've handled the scale problem. One is just that the games themselves are all virtual. In fact, everything is virtual. There are no face-to-face components to the NCL. The games themselves have been run for the past 2 years in Amazon's Web Services environment, EC2 instances, Elastic Cloud Compute instances. It's allowed us to, in some cases, on the fly increase based on load during the games. And so any number of players can participate from a school. Another way in which we've scaled is by doing exactly what we're doing today. Reach out and try to work with faculty themselves to provide resources for faculty, or what we call coaches, to start integrating NCL in the classroom. And the real scale there is by working with faculty, right? Teaching 1, 2, 3, 4 security classes, instead of 8 players perhaps competing. Now coaches have the ability to impact 40, 50, 60, 70 players at a time. And we can get more students participating. Go on here. So other differentiators from the NCL versus some of the other competitions. We have worked really hard on this model of that's been proven in the past couple of years to be very successful, which is to make lab exercises based on widely adopted industry performance-based certification exam objectives. So, for example, CompTIA Security Plus and EC Council Certified Ethical Hacker. Both of those exams, are currently knowledge-based exams. Now, CompTIA has introduced some performance-based questions into the Security Plus, but for the most part, those exams remain knowledge-based. And however, though, if you look at the exam objectives of the Security Plus and Certified Ethical Hacker exams, they do have what I would say, quote unquote, performance-based objectives in there. There is verbs. There is language in there that says the student should be able to do the following as a result of passing this exam. And so what the NCL did was pull out those verbs from both of those professional certifications and looked at the alignment between those two certifications and came up with a set of competencies that is on the National Cyber League website that I'm going to jump to right now. And specifically, let me blow up my screen here, towards the bottom, right? Open source intelligence gathering, network traffic analysis, log analysis. You see 9 of them here on the bottom of my screen, right? These are 9 performance-based competencies that are common to both the Security Plus and Certified Ethical Hacker certifications. And what the NCL did was create lab exercises around those. And those lab exercises are hosted 24/7 in what we call the National Cyber League Gymnasium. And that's hosted and maintained by Moraine Valley Community College. David Durkee is the person responsible really for ensuring that those are available 24/7. And those are the lab exercises that faculty, in fact, can include in their classrooms. The labs are free. They're available 24/7. And when we get to the section on available resources for coaches and players, I'll show you how you can get more information about those lab exercises. So that's one piece, right? But then the real differentiator from the NCL is then the alignment of games that measure or validate then the skills and knowledge that students are developing in the gymnasium practicing the labs, or what we call game balance, or what folks in the gaming industry call game balance. For us, game balance is making sure that there are appropriate challenges in the games for students at all different skill levels, and make sure that those challenges are in fact aligned with these hosted lab exercises. And what that allows the NCL to do is produce individualized reports, so what we call scouting reports. Right, it's a way for students to demonstrate the kinds of knowledge and skills they're developing in the gymnasium, and so that's a real key differentiator. In the process of students practicing these hands-on lab exercises in the gymnasium participating in games, students are in fact preparing for industry-recognized certifications. So Security Plus, Certified Ethical Hacker, for example. There's no limits really to this model. In fact, this idea of aligning hosted lab content or customized content with assessments, in fact, could work across different disciplines, curricula, verticals. So games measure skills, I mentioned that. The games support individual and team play, and we're really, really interested in baking learning objectives in everything we do. And that's evidenced by the kinds of resources we make available to faculty, which I'll show here. We do evaluation every year to see what's working, not working, and learn from our mistakes, learn from the previous season's lessons, and implement those in future seasons. James, do you want to take it from here? Talk a little bit about the partnerships.
Well, you're doing a great job, but I'll just say a word or two. Yeah, there were several different groups that came together: the Cassia Center, CyberWatch West, National CyberWatch Center, and IMPICT, as well as the group from DC. We got together first in 2011, and we've been working on it ever since.
Okay.
So, yeah, an ongoing virtual training ground for faculty and students to develop and validate cybersecurity skills. So yeah, this model is scalable, as Casey said already. We do it with Security Plus and Certified Ethical Hacker, but it could be anything related to an industry certification or a job role or other things. Eligibility requirements, that was one of the pieces that we thought was important. The rules in some of the cybersecurity competitions are hard on community college students. For example, requiring that they be full-time students. So many of the community college students are part-time. So we wanted this to be very inclusive, and community college students do compete against four-year college and university students. The games are optimized for individuals during the regular season, and then there's a postseason with team-based play. And for team-based play, soft skills are required. People have to coordinate and communicate and be respectful and manage their efforts together. Hosted lab exercises are based on NetLab. They're in what we call gymnasium, cyber gyms. They're hosted at Moraine Valley. They're the same labs that you see hosted in the NetLab environment.
I just wanted to tell a story, James. I didn't mean to interrupt. I apologize. In terms of the eligibility requirements. So when we met in May of 2011 at George Washington University, one of the things we did in that 2-day face-to-face meeting was we set up calls with a number of students throughout the country that had competed at that time in different, primarily the collegiate cyber defense competition, and we polled both students from 2- and 4-year schools. And we asked them if they felt like we needed a competition specifically for community college students, because at the time we were thinking actually we did. I myself, as Executive Director of National CyberWatch, and David Durkee and James Jones, were working predominantly in the community college space, and because of the eligibility requirements for the CCDC being that you have to be a full-time student, like James mentioned, it is a real deal breaker for many students. And in fact, what came out of that if you will, kind of informal survey with those students was that they actually didn't want a separate competition for community college students. They loved competing against the 4-year schools, and they felt like they could do equally as well. And so we shifted gears at that point. In fact, created the NCL and made it available to any undergraduate or graduate student from a U.S. accredited institution. And in the first 2 years of the NCL, we experimented with a number of different kinds of competitions and formats. So we did a network forensics type competition. We did an inherit and defend, all a kind of CCDC. We experimented with offense only, with attack and defend, a kind of a more traditional capture the flag, if you will. And we held a sort of been, I guess, spring of 2012. We held a face-to-face championship in Orlando, Florida, in conjunction with the Colloquium for Information Systems Security Education, or the CISSE conference. And that was a great story. It was number 1 against number 2 in the country, 2-year school, Mount San Antonio College in Walnut, California, versus number 2, DePaul University. And in fact, Mount San Antonio ended up winning the national championship. So kind of a fun story. And in fact,
they really enjoyed that.
They did, and the team captain for the DePaul team, Ryan Haley, is in fact the team captain and competing in this weekend's National Collegiate Cyber Defense competition for DePaul University. And that's also really one of the goals of the National Cyber League, is we really want this to be not only a development league, but a place where students can prepare for other competitions. And that's exactly the first bullet here on this slide here, right? We want students to be competing in U.S. Cyber Challenge and CCDCs of the world. So we divide the country up into 3 conferences based on geographic location. James is in San Francisco, so schools, in California, for example, will be in the Western Conference. I'm in Baltimore. Schools in the East Coast are in the Eastern Conference. David represents a center in Illinois. So we've adopted a bracketing system, which is really where students have either self-identified or done a preseason assessment based on perceived or demonstrated skill level. And the point of this really is just so students can compete against other students at a similar skill level. All students are presented all challenges, and so I didn't mention, but the NCL employs a type of capture the flag where students are presented challenges of all different kinds of requiring all different kinds of skills based on these 9 competencies here on my screen, and so it's a kind of competition where you have to apply the skills and knowledge you're developing in the classroom, in the gym, in the games themselves. And you're by solving the challenges, you identify or find flags, values of, for example, if it's open source intelligence challenge, the challenge may be who designed the National Cyber League website. and it requires some researching using a search engine of choice and arriving at some answer, some value, some flag. And then that flag value has been designed or designated a bronze, or novice, intermediate, or silver, or gold, or advanced level, meaning, the skills required to derive that flag value are a novice could do it, somebody with intermediate skills or somebody with advanced skills can accomplish that challenge. And those flags are worth certain points based on their perceived difficulty, and the person or team with the most points wins the competition, generally is how it works. Just some highlights from this last fall season here. So we mentioned both games for individuals and teams, and so you can see here the numbers of individuals competing. And registered user numbers are interesting. There are many competitions that get tens of thousands of students register, and 16 will compete. And that's one of the things that I think I'm personally most proud of, is that we have high numbers. 70 to 80% of our actual registered players are competing in the games, and the number of schools, the number of coaches participating is increasing. This shows the numbers of those competing in the team portion of the NCL. And so large numbers of schools competing in that. We do charge a nominal fee for players to participate. In the past, it's been $20 per individual. And then if students want to get together and form teams, we've charged $25 per team. You can have any number of students from a school compete, any number of teams compete. We have had, schools that have had 8 or 9 teams of 8 to 9 students per team compete. And the main reason we decided to charge a nominal fee, quite frankly, is just to really incentivize and motivate students to actually compete. Much like these webinars and free competitions, it's easy to sign up and easy to blow them off. And so we've seen a lot of success with folks paying in that regard and participating. And it's also helped to offset some of the costs to run the NCL, which is primarily volunteer run by academics who are really passionate about competitions and the value that we feel they have in helping to to validate both soft and technical skills. We had our first corporate sponsor, and we worked very hard on improved communication and marketing efforts. So I mentioned a little bit. I want to try to wrap up here in the next couple minutes so we can get into questions. And go ahead and feel free to post your questions in the chat room. So we'll start taking those in a couple minutes. I want to talk a little bit about the scouting reports. And I want to talk a little bit about resources available for faculty to integrate this in the classroom. So one thing we've done is we've tried to align the competition events to academic calendars, primarily around the semester calendar, although this year we're going to extend registration to accommodate schools that are in the quarter-based system. We've taken feedback from folks, and we've implemented that. We have I'll show you some of the resources in a second here. I want to talk about the NCL scouting report, because I think it's a real differentiator, and it's a really valuable asset. So in effect, what we're doing again is aligning content based on professional certifications available in gymnasiums. And I can show you, so for example, on the NCL website, nationalcyberleague.org, there's a lab exercises link here, and there are 20 labs for Security Plus and 19 labs for Certified Ethical Hacker. These have been updated recently, and with each of the labs, there is a specific topology that's been designed. So this is something that I worked on with the author of the labs themselves, Jesse Varsalone, who used to be with the Community College of Baltimore County. You'll notice it's a two-subnet topology, so some of the labs require students to use systems on the same, for example, internal network. Other labs, you have students coming across from an external, say, public network, so working on, phishing lab exercises and whatnot. So each of the both Security Plus and ethical hacking labs have their own topology. Again, available via the NCL gymnasiums, and you can get more information about the labs themselves on the NCL site under lab exercises. So I wanted to point that out. Let me go back here. And those labs are aligned with games, as we mentioned. And at the end of the individual games, we produce what's called a scouting report. I'm going to pull up a sample one here. I'm going to try to blow it up a little bit for you. But what it is basically is individual. It's specifically for each individual. And we keep track of statistics, like how many players, for example, competed in a preseason assessment, and how did this individual do, what bracket were they in. So they were in the gold bracket, which means that they did extremely well in a preseason assessment based on the kinds of solved challenges that were considered advanced by the NCL. And we keep statistics about how many players competed in that competition, how many submitted a flag, how many flags were there total. And then what you'll see is, again, given these, let me go back to these competencies here, sorry. Given these competencies that I mentioned here, we rank players overall. So how did James Jones do against every single player in the United States against these 9 competencies? And we come up with an overall ranking. And then we also rank individuals in each of the individual competencies themselves. And so, for example, here you see this player after the regular season game 1. So the first game for individuals, this player basically was 238th nationally out of about, let's see how many players were, out of about, I think, 800 some players in that game, and their combined score. And then same for game 2. So you can see that for game 2, this individual ranked about 299th overall. So across those 9 competencies. But then what we do is we break down an individual in each of the competencies. So you can see that this person was 50th in the nation in enumeration and exploitation and 95th in web application exploitation, did not solve any cryptographic challenges, was 430th in log file analysis. And so what this allows coaches and players to do is see strengths and weaknesses across a set of predefined industry recognized competencies. And it also allows you as coaches to validate your programs. If you notice that your players are not doing well in a specific area consistently, that may be an area, in fact, you need to work on, or it may be areas in which you want to create content. Generally speaking, the community colleges do very little in web application, for example, specifically writing web apps, but definitely, exploiting. They tend to be more network security, information assurance, system hardening focused. But it also, we then make these scouting reports available to organizations looking to recruit. So students during registration for the fall season can opt into a recruiting program and say, I'd like to actually make my scouting report available to companies looking to recruit. And then companies pay to get access to these reports, and we link then players with these companies. It's the main reason Facebook became a sponsor, right? They're looking for talent. They've got 700 positions a year that go unfilled. This is Facebook, right? So imagine if they can't fill positions, how challenging it is for other companies. So a real key differentiator, the scouting reports. What else? talked about how we prepare for, how students are preparing for professional certs. I showed you the lab exercises. There's a bunch of tutorials and videos. So one page on the NCL site everybody should go to is the Coaches page, which has some FAQs. We have a whole preparation section, links to the lab exercises, information about the bracketing systems, instructor syllabi. This is something based on our evaluation this year that was actually not used that much, which is really interesting. But we've created a syllabi that talk with a recommended textbook, and this will be updated by the fall. We're going with a different textbook, Jones and Bartlett Learning textbook, and we've updated this to reflect the changes to the new Security Plus exam, which still has these 6 domain areas. The percentages have slightly changed between them. What you'll see here is that we've mapped our lab exercises, right, with the specific domain. So, for example, there's a lab exercise, network devices and technologies, capturing network traffic. So that lab exercise maps specifically to the Security Plus network security domain. So you can see this kind of cross-mapping between our lab exercises and the exam objectives, in this case of Security Plus. But more specifically, we've created a suggested schedule, right, that basically maps to a recommended textbook, our lab exercises, and the games. And this is something that we really encourage faculty to think about using, right? Either make the lab exercises a requirement as part of your security class or supplemental extra credit, which many have done. So we really encourage faculty to look at this Coaches page on the NCL site and check out some of these resources. There are a bunch of video tutorials, etc. Let me go back to my PowerPoint here. Solutions documents, there's some available. We're working on solutions for this past fall season. So how do I actually solve some of these challenges? That's something that really players and coaches want, and we've got some of those available. And then I want to go over the schedule real quick, and then we'll open it up to questions. So on the NCL site is a schedule link. And right now, this is the fall schedule. So I mentioned that we've extended the registration period to accommodate schools on a quarter-based system. There's links about the games themselves. A lot of information here. We're going through a process right now to revamp the website, taking feedback from a number of folks on this call to look at a better user experience. There's lots of information here. It's really, quite frankly, the main place to point students and for you yourselves to go to get more information about the NCL. I also want to mention that I worked with 3 folks from both the Midwest, Eastern, and Western regions to update the rules document, and that will be posted here in the next week or so. So I just encourage everybody to spend some time on the NCL site. And with that, I can go back to my PowerPoint. Just different ways you can connect with the NCL, Facebook, website, Twitter, and there is a follow us link, so you can basically check us out on Twitter or Facebook. We're very active, and we use social media a lot to communicate changes or information that's going on with the NCL. David or James, before I turn it over to folks for Q&A, is there anything you want to add that I didn't cover?
Well, this is James. Just some high-level perspective. The reason we do this is there's a huge shortage of skilled cybersecurity professionals. We're already 1 million workers short globally in that space. These competitions inspire students. They create passion and engagement. There were something like 100,000 shots on goals in the regular season play. Students will spend more time on these games than they will on homework and other things. A lot of the other competitions are really about show up with whatever knowledge and skills you have from wherever you have them. And then the competition is fun and engaging, but the kinds of feedback that the players get is you won or you didn't win. And we know that players like a lot more feedback than that on how they're doing. And NCL is focused on player development, developing knowledge and skills in an academic environment over a semester, and that makes it pretty unique. So NCL's come a long way, and it's not perfect, but it's a good experience.
Thanks for that, David.
This is Dave Durkee. I think just to add a little bit to what already has been said, there's been a move to try and coordinate this in a way that's preparatory also to the CCDC, but it still has an eye for greater amounts of participation. Casey mentioned the limited amount of participation that's involved in the CCDC, but at the same time, it was felt that because of the performance that we've seen at CCDC events, there was a need for a greater amount of preparatory work by way of exercises. And there's in meeting some of the goals of the workplace, the shortage that we have there, I think we all realize that there needs to be more real life kinds of situations, real life kinds of integration of the skills that they learn that they just can't get in the classroom. And so that's what the NCL is all about.
Thanks for that. And one thing here before we start answering questions, which is, I think it's important to just level set or at least right-size the conversation, and that is, to some degree the NCL has been an experiment and continues to be an experiment. It's actually one of the things I really like about this. We take kind of this lean startup approach where you have a hypothesis, which is we can, if we align custom content with assessments, we'll be able to validate skills. So that's the hypothesis. Let's implement that. Let's do some evaluation. Let's get feedback. Let's tweak that and continue in kind of that feedback loop. And as such, the NCL has been experimental, and there's been things that have been hugely successful and massive failures in a big way, where we've learned a tremendous amount. We've had games where there were big problems with the hosted cloud environment, and a lot of cheating and et cetera. But, so know that, it's an experiment in a way, and we're really, there's a call to action, right? Any good presentation or discussion, I think, ends with the call to action. And really our call to action today is, we're looking for folks to be more involved. We want help from coaches and players in developing challenges and the targets themselves and scenarios and even solutions. We want to be able to be more responsive with feedback and provide solutions in a timely manner. And so that's the main takeaway from my perspective is really this kind of call to action to get more involved. And for those that are on WebEx, you can see my email address, cobrien@nationalcyberwatch.org. Feel free to reach out, and we'd love to get more participation. So with that, let's turn it over to some of the questions. I'll take a couple from the chat room. Will there be a fall and spring competition? So right now, we're only running the NCL in the fall. We actually created the NCL with this idea that it would be a season long, right? One of the things I mentioned when I started was that most of the current competitions, especially in the academic space, are one-off playoff systems. Right, so we wanted to be a full season where perhaps there would be a fall and spring competition season, and then winter, summer would be preparation in the gyms. And the reality is we're just stretched too thin right now to be able to do a spring competition. But this gets at the call to action with more player and coach support. This is absolutely something we want to do. So for the fall season, it will be in fact just the fall, not the spring. Next question was, Here, let's go back up. Excuse me a second. When will you know the new recommended text for Security Plus and CEH? The CEH materials will not change. The new text for Security Plus, we already know that. It's going to be a customized edition of a Jones and Bartlett learning book called Fundamentals of Information System Security by David Kim and Michael Solomon. We're actually going through editing that, making it a new version, and I've already updated the Security Plus syllabus and lab exercise to map to this textbook. So the official answer will be we'll know June 1st. And so we'll certainly make that information available. From the same person, have you ever used test out material? I have. Not really all that thrilled with it personally. Unfortunately, our Security Plus course runs in the spring, not the fall. Is there access available to old games that I can add to the course? If so, how do we access those? So there are. In years past, we've used iSight partners. We've outsourced the games to them. So they've created the challenges, they've created the targets, the flags, and specifically their brand is known as ThreatSpace. So ThreatSpace is the iSight partner team that runs cybersecurity exercise and manages events. And on the NCL site, under preparation, there are a bunch of good resources. So, and some of those are about how do you get into that environment. So, and specifically, I would point out the puzzle graveyard. So the puzzle graveyard is where challenges from previous competitions go to die, if you will. So the challenge answers are known, and therefore you can't really reuse them. And ThreatSpace makes these challenges available to anybody, so you can basically create an account and get access to some of these challenges. Full disclosure, some of the puzzle graveyard challenges don't work because they rely on targets that have since been deprecated, but many do. And so what I would encourage you to do is go to the preparation link on the NCL site, and specifically this section on there are past challenges from previous NCL seasons players and coaches can use to continually develop knowledge and validate skills. And so I think that's one way in which you can get the old games, add them to your courses, and access those. And there's we have videos on how do you solve an example puzzle. So these are all 7 to 15-minute videos. How do I submit a flag in the system? How do I get logged in? A whole tutorial around the ThreatSpace environment. So I encourage you to look there. I mentioned previous season challenge solutions, and we've got one from the 2012 season. So this is a write-up from the person that actually won the individual portion of the 2012, the fall 2012 National Cyber League season. And I mentioned we're working on solutions from this past season, so be sure to check that out. Another question, we're going to stick with Saturday individual and week-long team games. That is the plan right now. So what that means is for the individual portion of the season, remember games where individuals from a school can compete, those have typically been on a specific day at a specific time. So a Saturday from 2 to 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, for example. And that's the only day and time that game was available. And then what we've done for the team portion, where individuals from a school get together and form teams and compete, we've made the team games a week long. So, you've got a week to go in, or you can go in multiple times in the ThreatSpace environment and compete, submit challenges, et cetera, et cetera. And that is the plan right now. We realize that Having a game take place on a specific day and time doesn't work for some, and the reality is there's always going to be somebody that's not going to be able to compete, regardless of kind of we go with a specific day and time or open it for a week. And so I realize that doesn't work for everybody, but that is the plan for the fall season. There's a question that says, can non-full-time students make use of the exercises? Absolutely. There is no full-time requirement or eligibility. Oh, I apologize. So, basically the only eligibility requirements is that you're an undergraduate or graduate student at an accredited U.S. institution. And so, there are schools and coaches that will sign up for the NCL and not have their students compete. They really just want access to those labs. There are others that only really want to compete in the games. They're not interested in the labs. And then there are those that like both the lab exercises and the games themselves. You've got some flexibility in terms of, how you use the NCL in the classroom. So those are the questions from the chat room. I'll go ahead and start unmuting people at the risk of our audio going crazy. If folks have other questions specifically, give me a second here.
Yeah. We don't want to open that sucker up that way.
So this is dangerous, unmuting everybody. So, but are there any questions from the participants that are not? Let's see. While I go ahead and unmute folks, how do coaches register to view labs and games? So there is a registration on the schedule link on the NCL site. And hang on a second. Give me a second here. One thing we've talked about doing is making the labs available to coaches over the summer. One of the difficulties is registration runs basically from August for the fall season, it's going to run from August 15th to October 3rd. Well, if you wait till August to register, doesn't give you a lot of time to actually work through the labs and figure out how to integrate them in your classes, right? Remember, we do have a syllabi we make available with the suggested course sequence and recommended textbooks. So one thing we have decided to do is make the gymnasium available over the summer. And so we're probably going to do that. We haven't figured out dates, but most likely it'll be available towards the latter part of June through August. So that would be your chance to go in and view the labs and work through them and figure out how to integrate them in your classes. And we'll be sending out an email to all coaches letting them know. There is a contact form on the NCL site. So if you're not currently signed up for a mailing list, you can send an email that way, or you can send an email to me through my email address on the screen here, cobrien@nationalcyberwatch.org, and we'll get you on that mailing list. That's the main way in which we communicate with players and coaches. So let's see here. Can we have multiple coaches like faculty and TAs? Absolutely. Absolutely. Over the summer, access will be awesome. Yep. And let's see, any other questions?
Casey, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Jeff Teal from Montreat College. So thank you, Casey. Kudos to you and the team. This is our second year, and we look forward to participating this coming fall, which will make that the third year for us. So just a couple of comments. You mentioned about making this available to faculty and coaches. Definitely encourage you and the organization to do that. It's for me, during the summer, there's a lot of competing competing activities, and I do want to spend some time doing this. You mentioned about working through the solutions. I think those are very important, at least from my perspective, to have the solution and to work through those. So if that comes through, through for access during the summer and the solution, I think that would be great.
Jeff, thank you for that, and I appreciate your participation. And it's really one of our main goals for the fall is to really be more timely with not only solutions but the scouting reports, because the reality is it takes us too long right now to get that feedback. It's the equivalent of like you take a final exam in December and you don't get the results till April. And the reality is we're just stretched too thin. And I know that's an excuse, but it is really the reality, and thus the kind of call for action for more support. And I think there are ways in which we can do that. One is just get faculty and coaches and players to help us create solutions while they're going through the games and then make those available. Again, a couple things about getting access to the lab exercises. So if you are signed up for the NCL mailing list, we'll be sending out something in the next 6 to 8 weeks about how you can register specifically as a coach to get access to those labs over the summer. Getting the syllabi. The syllabi is on the NCL site. It's going to be updated, though. Specifically, the Security Plus one will be updated. So take a look now, though. That'll give you a sense of a kind of a suggested course sequence. If you're not signed up for the NCL mailing list, you can either send an email to me or you can, there's a contact us form on the NCL site. I'd also encourage folks to think about going to the following, which is, so if you go to nationalcyberwatch.org, there is a link on the top of that page, programs, and Community College Cyber Summit. And this is the second year that this is running. It's open to any faculty, but it's really geared primarily towards faculty at the 2-year level that are teaching information security already, have programs, or looking to create programs. And it's going to be at the College of Southern Nevada at the Cheyenne campus, June 17th through the 19th. And I'd really encourage folks to register for this. We've got about 70 spaces left, so we're going to have about upwards of 275 faculty, some fantastic hands-on sessions, great networking event, and there'll be some specific sessions on the NCL, and it'll be a great place to network with like-minded folks who are using the NCL, have used it, and just talk to them a little bit about how they've integrated in the classroom. So there was a comment, would you consider a coach's bracket for individual games? I think we would. In fact, there is a bracket, we call it the pewter bracket, which is where students who don't really want to be scored, they want to work with their teammates and or coaches to solve these challenges together, and so they're not scored. They don't get scouting reports. They don't get certificates of participation, but they get the value of competing and learning. You can compete in that pewter bracket. So, and coaches have been encouraged to do that in the past. I want to just again encourage everyone to follow NCL on our social media and to help us grow the NCL by liking and sharing our updates and information to others. There's a comment here, looking at the CH syllabus, are all of the textbooks required? It depends. So it depends on how you're teaching the class. If it's a 7-week format, 5-week, 10, 15, and the reality is just how much you can actually get through. But those textbooks are the official curriculum as required by EC Council. So I know that's not really a solid answer, but So that's really the official program. We've got about a minute left. I want to thank everybody for joining. I want to thank our panelists, James Jones, David Durkee. I want to thank everybody who's participated over the years. And again, really want to encourage folks to get involved in lots of different ways to get involved. And look for an email in your inboxes with a link to this recording, and just want to quickly talk about the next webinar, May 29th. Again, they're the last Friday of each month, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. The next webinar is going to focus on the National Centers of Academic Excellence in Information Assurance and Cyber Defense, so the CAE program, and specific updates to that program and technical support available to schools thinking about going after that designation. So that's the official program. I want to thank everybody. Hope you have a great weekend. Feel free to reach out with any questions, and until then, we'll see you next time.